What is your best idiot neighbor story? I had a problem with a neighbor who drove over my lawn with his ATVs and damaged the grass and shrubs. He said he'd pay for the damage, but that never happened, and he kept doing it. So I put my huge trailer across the tracks to block their path. They went around it. I put up 2 other barriers that they also drove around, so I found this huge branch that had fallen in the woods between our properties and dragged it across to cover the 3rd path that they were making across my yard. But the branch got caught on a cable. What is a cable doing over the lawn instead of properly buried? So I called the cable company to have it buried. They said I was the only registered client on that box and to disconnect it. So I did. After the weekend, my neighbor came by going total ape crap on me for disconnecting the cable. He yelled that he was going to call the cops on me, so I left. I got a call from the cops. The cops asked if I disconnected the cable because of the ATV issue. Interesting. I wasn't even going to mention the ATV issue, but my neighbor already did. So long story short, the neighbor got a warning ticket for trespassing and admitted to stealing cable. I took an offer on my house that very day and moved. That guy's a dumbass. Calling the cops for a crime he committed? I wonder how many times this happens. Well, there was that time 2 self-proclaimed dumbasses tried to transport 20 pounds of marijuana across state lines, got paranoid and called the cops on themselves. They kept seeing police on the road and assumed that they were being followed. They called 911 and were saying things like, "We know what's going on and we just want it all to be over with, so here we are, turning ourselves in." But the 911 operator had no idea what they were talking about. Later, the police confirmed they had not been following the guys and had no idea about the weed until they called it in. My dad had a neighbor when he was young who played his radio loudly all day, even when he wasn't home or was gone on vacation. Every time he left the house and his radio was still on, my dad would go and trip the circuit breaker to his condo. One day, he sees my dad, who was an electrical engineer, and asked him why his breaker kept tripping. Was it faulty wiring? No. My dad explained the loud radio was probably just putting too much strain on the circuit when left on all the time. My dad suggested he should try turning it down or off when he wasn't home, and see if that fixed it. So the man tried it, and surprise, surprise, the circuit breaker stopped tripping. He was very thankful to my dad for helping him with that annoying electrical issue. Genius. But like, someone has tried explaining electricity to me and I really don't know. I'm just too stupid. But how could someone be that dumb? Neighbor dug a hole on our side of the yard because she needed dirt. Both of us live on an acre of land. Guess you'll have to find some dirt to fill that hole in with. Wonder where you could get some of that. The best part about this was I found it mowing the lawn and I thought I fractured my ankle, and my parents were mad at me for digging a hole. My constantly wasted neighbor came up with the brilliant idea that he could collect the leaves in the stone parking lot with his snowblower. He duct taped a plastic garbage bag over the discharge chute, and off he goes. It actually inflated the bag for a few minutes until the stones started flying. He broke 3 windows on his garage door and splattered a bunch of cars in the lot. Crap my britches laughing. I could write a book on all the stupid crap I saw him do. Is your neighbor Tim Allen? If so, does he ever get to see your whole face? If it was Tim Allen, the story would have started with him putting a turbo or NO2 on the snowblower. Neighbor has a teenage son, 2 years my junior, who's an idiot. Got a used car for his birthday and decided to paint it neon green. Okay. One night he comes home wasted and proceeds to crash into my dad's car parked outside. Decides to hide it, poorly, and the next morning claims it wasn't him. We probably would have believed him had the damage on my dad's car not had neon green paint swapped to it, moron. We lived next to this big guy in an apartment building, front doors inside a hallway. Now, he was a nice enough guy, but he was always cleaning a puddle up in front of his apartment every other day. We'd always ask him if everything was alright, and he'd talk some incoherent crap about how he hated management. So out of curiosity, I asked management when I happened to be in the rental office, and the lady rolls her eyes and says, "This idiot fills his tub up to the brim and sits his fat ass in the tub." The water, of course, floods his entire apartment and comes out into the hallway, and this idiot has the balls to blame us somehow. I pretty much said, "Geez, sounds rough," and scurried on back to my place. If the tub story is really the truth, this guy must be dumb as rocks. This is someone desperately in need of a eureka moment. I watched my across-the-street neighbor cut his 3/4-acre lawn entirely with an electric weed whacker because he didn't have the time to drive a mile to get gas for his lawnmower. I kid you not, this one dude in my neighborhood let his grass get so tall that he couldn't use a lawnmower on it. Was driving one day and saw the idiot with a weed whacker going at grass taller than him. I bought a house and then bought an old-fashioned reel mower. By the time I was able to cut the yard for the first time, it was too tall for the mower to be effective, so I had to use a trimmer on the entire yard first. I own about 8 acres. The house next to me has a right-of-way drive that goes through it. A couple bought the house about 10 years ago. One day they were down near the mailboxes planting some plants. I went down and very nicely told them that what they had done was fine, but in the future, before they do anything on my property, they need to ask me first. He argued with me that they had rights to all of the property on each side of the right-of-way. I explained to him that this just wasn't true. They haven't spoken to me since and won't even return my wave when I wave at them. If they want to be mad at someone, it is the agent who sold them the house, not me. Really, not even the agent. The blame falls on them as the buyers. Anyone who buys a home without reading the title and checking a survey is an idiot. Who knows? The survey says it is a right-of-way. It doesn't explain what that is, and not everybody knows. Our neighbor is a strange woman with a lot of strange habits. For example, she waters her plants even when it's raining outside, and she complains about ice cream being cold, so she microwaves it first. My grandmother had a neighbor who would water her flowers every day, rain or shine. My grandmother liked to watch and cackle gleefully because the woman was convinced that her careful watering was the reason her flowers were so much better than everyone else's. She would brag at the clubhouse how her flowers were always in bloom, even in winter. My grandmother never told her that they were always in bloom because they were fake flowers. I was an idiot neighbor, or a crazy one. When my son was a newborn, he was very colicky and barely slept for more than a few hours at a time. I was so tired and literally losing my mind. There was a house of old bikers down the street, and they would constantly drive down our road and rev their engines. I mean, my husband's rides. I know it's possible to drive down the street and rattle windows. It would wake the baby up. So I went down there and asked very nicely. I said, "Hey guys, I know it's your street too, but I have a young baby who you wake up every time you do that. Can you guys just not rev your engines on the street?" They seemed super cool about it, and I was so thankful, but it made it worse, not better. Now it was like a game to really rev when they went by my house. It became like the telltale heart and started to drive me mad. Every time I heard it, I became one step closer to buying a machine gun and mowing them down. I became completely irrational one day and stormed down the street. I burst into their backyard where they were hanging and yelled at them like a crazy person, threatened to kick their asses, call the cops, slash their tires, whatever it took for them to stop revving their engines. It finally stopped, but I am still embarrassed about how crazy I acted. Sleep deprivation is a hell of a drug. A little while after my daughter was born, my next-door neighbor, a nice older lady with a whole bunch of kids and grandkids, offered to babysit my daughter for a little while. Turns out she heard me pleading with my daughter to just shut up once in a while at 3:30 in the morning one day. I was embarrassed until she said she used to do the same thing with a few of her kids when they were little. That's a nice neighbor you have there. Our neighbors have a second kitchen in the basement that they use for everything, so the actual kitchen won't look used or dirty. That's actually genius. I need a whole other house as a show house for visitors, one without all of the kids' toys in it. This used to be a thing mostly in Italian families that did a lot of cooking. Not so much anymore. The upstairs kitchen was for gathering or visiting. If your family member had a downstairs kitchen, you knew you could pretty much stop in whenever and there would be food to eat. A neighbor messed up when building a home and put his entire home well within my property. A large piece of land with 2 huge clearings connected to 2 roads, but separated by a large isthmus of trees. I didn't notice because I had taken an 8-month vacation right after he started building. Huge property. I didn't go around and inspect it often, so I got a real estate lawyer and surveyors to confirm it was my property. I was going to sell him that clearing for a good price until I went to talk to him, and he was the biggest asshole I had ever met. He essentially told me that he is going to sue me for leading him on, despite the fact that I did not know him, nor have I met him before that day. His wife flipped me and my girlfriend off as we were pulling out of their driveway. 4 months later, I file a lawsuit saying that he must destroy the property or turn it over to me immediately. It would have cost him more to demolish it and return the site to its original condition, so he signed the house over to me. He was still out for construction costs. I was living in a single wide with my girlfriend. Then I had a brand new 2,600 square foot house with all the hookups for water, electric, and cable for free. Got the land for next to nothing and sold it for almost 50 times the value. I feel like this is better than winning the lottery. It was. He thought that a line on the survey map was a road and didn't realize that it was my property line. I think he did eventually get the money back because the builders were sued. I live on a 50-plus acre New England farm. About 2/3 of it is wooded. After I'd been here for about a year, I was walking the boundary stone wall about 10 feet on my side of the land. From a neighbor's yard, I hear a bellowing voice, "You'd better not be on my land." I replied, "I'm not. I'm on my own land." He yells back from somewhere in the trees on his side, "Just so you know, never step foot on my land." Me, "Okay, we've got a deal, and you stay off mine, okay?" I hear a grunt. Then I ask, "By the way, is this your deer hunting tree stand on my side of the wall?" At which point he exploded. "That stand has been there for 10 years. My extended family owned about 400 acres, different plots, along one stretch of road. We would constantly find very elaborate deer stands set up in strategic locations. No one had permission to hunt on any of these properties. Every summer, the kids were tasked with finding them and ripping them down. We were 11 to 12 and loved being in the woods, so the benefit of adult-approved destruction was an easy sell. We have a grandma next door who is raising her 3 grandchildren. They are complete teenage idiots. They got in trouble for stealing from our neighbors. The kids would offer to cut their grass and ask to use their bathroom when they were done. Then they would steal medication from the bathroom. It was extremely obvious who stole the medication. They pulled this scam up and down the block. Wasn't too hard to put it together. I feel bad for everyone in this situation. Those kids are dumb as heck, but if my parents hadn't been around to beat my ass when I did dumb crap, I would probably have a pretty significant criminal record. And it sucks for the grandma who probably has a hard time handling 3 grandchildren who obviously had a crappy childhood. Otherwise, they'd probably still be with their parents. I mean, it blows you and your neighbors have to deal with that, but in that situation, everyone loses. I agree. They needed some serious guidance. I felt bad for the grandma for the longest time, but then I realized she was letting them get away with that stuff. She would see her teen grandkids smoking pot and not do anything about it. The kids seemed to have free reign over everything. She just gives them food and a place to stay. When I was a kid, we had this guy living next door who seemed like a nice guy. This is in the mid-90s and he had a neon business, so he was doing pretty well for himself. Then he got together with a crackhead and his house slowly started going to crap, literally. At one point, his septic system went up, and since they were smoking every dime he made, he decided that he was just going to make a cesspit. We live on the East Coast in the mid-Atlantic, and it gets hot and humid come July. Thanks to this guy, our entire neighborhood smelled like a spada-pot at the Midsummer Festival for about 3 months. Fast forward to January, nice and snowy, we come home to our house being broken into. The computer is gone, the TV is gone, and a bunch of movies and meds are gone. Cops show up and they start dusting and looking around. They go outside and lo and behold, there are tracks going from our side door back to the neighbor's house. Of course, they deny everything and are at least smart enough not to keep the stuff around after we got home. They were not smart enough to use different names. They pawned everything though. Needless to say, we had new neighbors within a few months of this incident. This reminds me of some crap neighbors I had when I lived in Washington. They would steal my firewood during winter. I had a lot, so I didn't mind too much. When I saw them outside, I just asked them not to go back and take it. Just give me a ring and I'd be happy to bring some over. Cue them going off on me, calling them thieves. I'm an asshole, etc. Next snowfall, there was firewood missing, tracks from their back door to my woodpile and back to their house. Got the cops to deal with it and a trespass warning. They stopped talking to me after that. When I lived with my parents, we had a knock at the door one day from our neighbors across the road. They told us a story that resulted in their car getting stolen the night before. Apparently, the wife had seen a strange-looking man wandering around the street late at night. He had apparently been looking into car windows, which were parked on driveways, including our cars. The next morning, their BMW was gone, including the keys, which were hanging by the front door of their house. They assumed the strange man looking in car windows had somehow fished the keys from the house via the letterbox. The whole thing sounded very strange. To not call the police when a man is literally peering through car windows on people's driveways was strange enough. Months later, the neighbors got a divorce and sold their house. Turns out they'd made the whole thing up and had dumped the car for the insurance, as they had fallen on hard times. Apparently their crappy story hadn't held up well and they were found out. Who broadcasts a story like that? Why make yourself look stupid for not calling the police when seeing a strange man eyeing up your cars? Then tell all the neighbors about the man? They probably were hoping a neighbor would collaborate the story with the insurance company. Even though it was made up, they had hoped to put the thought into people's heads, and one would think, yeah, that guy I saw the other day did look shady and seemed interested in people's cars. Neighbor, after someone had attempted to steal his bike and was advised by me to get a better lock, proceeded to save his time by not locking his bike up at all, but was balancing the lock so that it looked like his bike was locked up unless you actually looked at it for a few seconds. I warned him that someone had already tried to steal his bike and that it wasn't really clever leaving it unlocked like that. He says, "I promise you I'll lock it up." Why he is promising me anything, I have no idea. I was just being neighborly. He then leaves his bike unlocked like that for about a week until someone stole it. I guess it did save the thief time. That's how my grandma leaves her motorcycle shed locked, but it's a secluded lake house in the middle of nowhere, so she never worries about crime. That said, along with the motorcycle, she also keeps a kayak and a jet ski in there. There used to be 2 kayaks, but we left one outside on the side of the shed once, and it disappeared. So the thieves were opportunistic enough to grab the obvious kayak, but not investigative enough to figure out that another kayak and a whole load of other stuff were available just a couple of steps away. I have crazy neighbors. They are actually very nice as neighbors go, but the family is totally dysfunctional. They have 2 grown-up daughters living there, along with their teenage daughters and their boyfriends. One has a kid. There are roughly 10 people living there, ranging from 5 to 70. They keep the yard mowed and keep to themselves mostly, but they are bat-crap insane. I like them actually for 2 reasons. First, they are notorious and crazy around our town, so everyone leaves them alone, so little crime around us. Second, they are entertainment. One morning, my aunt was visiting. We are on the front porch and I'm telling her about all the neighbors. I was telling her a story about how one of the younger granddaughters got in a fight with her boyfriend at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night. They were screaming at each other walking up and down the street, explaining that something like that happens once a week. Like clockwork, one of the daughters comes out screaming back at someone and gets in her car. Her daughter comes out and tries to stop her from backing out. She grabs a shovel from the back of the truck and starts hitting the front windshield of the car, scattering it. They call the cops. Meanwhile, the granddaughter with the shovel calls her bio dad, who lives down the street. He picks his daughter up. 2 minutes later, the cop shows up, but she is gone. I have hundreds like this. Your front lawn is like an episode of Dr. Phil or Maury Povich. I almost envy you. I think it's made it all the way to Jerry Springer territory. Our neighbor homeschooled his kids and would always brag about how his children were geniuses with perfect scores on all the standardized tests. Sure, they got 1600 out of 1600 on the SAT, but he would never let them play with us unwashed masses. 20 years later, his kids are still living at home and all of them lack the social skills to make connections and get a job. Book smarts will only get you so far. That's sad if someone focuses on achievement this much. It's not sad to focus on achievement that much. It's sad to focus on achievement that much and then fail to achieve anything. Their strategy was bad. My parents' house is on top of a hill, and our backyard had an awesome downhill for sledding. The hill had like 2 or 3 big trees on it, but otherwise it was clear. We moved in when I was 2 to 3. At the bottom of the hill was this flat space with a bunch of dead trees and rocks. Every day for about 10 years, my dad moved the dead trees into the nearby woods and tossed every rock he could find over there. By the time we were old enough to sled, we could do so safely, and the place was a great area to sled. This particular chunk of land was unallocated and part of no plot. Strictly speaking, given local laws, my father caring for the unallocated land for 10 years with proof, that land got absorbed into our plot and ownership. Well, at some point, halfway through, the neighbor at the bottom of the hill builds this huge ugly metal fence enclosing his part, which was his yard and a third of the cleared area. That was annoying, but whatever. Well, he yelled at us anytime we played in the other spot or sled down the hill. He was a former police officer and he had 2 dogs that were retired police dogs. Why were these dogs retired? They were considered overly violent. How do we know this? Because he likes to brag about it. His reasoning for why we shouldn't play there was because it would drive his overly violent dogs nuts. We ignored him and kept playing. Well, one summer, to discourage us from sledding in the winter, he planted a wall of trees along the bottom of our hill. These were all maybe 6 to 8 feet tall, with trunks an inch or 2 wide. We just shrugged and kept sledding, killing the trees in our way. A bit of a peen move on our part perhaps, but amusingly enough, it turns out the spot he planted the trees was actually part of our plot. It wasn't the unallocated spot. So when he threatened to sue, my dad, a lawyer, just laughed and pointed it out. The guy basically gave up after that point, except that whenever he saw us playing back there, he let the dogs out into the yard. So we'd be playing soccer or whatever. Meanwhile, these dogs were constantly sticking their snouts through the fence, growling and snapping at us. I love dogs. My family has 2 of them, but these 2 dogs were honestly everything I'd imagine someone thinks of when they call dogs vicious animals. There was a big hubbub in the neighborhood twice when the dogs bit people and attacked other dogs during the guy's walk. He paid their medical bills but suffered no other issues and was able to keep the dogs. He got special dispensation from the local police department. It was also during this period of time, incidentally, that his own daughter had to get 10 stitches on her arm because one of the dogs went full-on takedown mode on her in their home. It's a shame his poor ownership probably ruined the training they had. It was later found that he was bipolar. Once he got on meds for that, he became an actually very likable guy that started making, frankly, sane decisions. Back in high school, one of our neighbors moved away and their house was sold to this older woman and her grown sons. She was a strange one. She cut down every tree on her property because of the bad spirits in them. The sons seemed to be popular, having people drop by at all hours. All was relatively quiet until one day, while I was home alone, there was a knock on the door. Two gentlemen in very nice black suits and dark ties then identified themselves as FBI and asked me if we were ever approached by a crazy lady or her sons to buy anything. I basically replied with, "They are crazy and we don't talk to them, they don't talk to us." They hand me their business card and then proceed on to the next house. I look out the window and see 5 blue Ford Tauruses, 3 red Ford Astro vans, and 1 Viacom truck that was being loaded with box after box from the neighbor's garage. Turns out the Sons were making those special cable boxes that got you all of the channels for free. After this, it was only the strange lady left in that house. Thanks for watching until the end. Do you have a crazy neighbor? We'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe, and then hit that notification bell so that you know when our next video is available. For more videos like this one, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time!